Already.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that.
No, sure.
I started already.
Let's start.
Yeah, let's start.
Uh, Good evening, dear friends. Uh,
Good evening.
After a long nightmare of lockdown, let's now begin and unlock our lives uh, with the same as before. And nothing like that face best way to begin. And today, on behalf of Nephrology Forum of Ahmedabad, I'm very happy to welcome you all from Ahmedabad and across the Gujarat for this today's symposium, which is on the role of electron microscopy in native and renal graft biopsy. I also appreciate a great enthusiasm which we have seen in today's quiz by both the senior and junior nephrology colleagues, and almost everyone was to the correct answer. But we cannot have so many correct, so many winners. So first three contestants will be given the prize, and the prize will be declared at the end of the session. We are also very lucky and honored to have eminent speaker like Dr. Vanita Batra and Dr. Bhavna Mehta for today's session. To chair the session, we have Dr. Asif Mehta today. Dr. Asif doesn't need any introduction to today's audience. Maybe few of our junior friends may not know about him. So I would like to officially introduce Dr. Asif has done his nephrology from SGPGI Lucknow, following which he worked as a consultant nephrologist at IKDRC, then Apollo Ahmedabad and Apollo Mauritius. Presently, he is head of the Department of Nephrology at Narayan Hrudayalaya. I request Dr. Asif Mehta to chair the session and introduce the speakers, please.
So, hello friends, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
So, welcome everybody to this first session, I think, of virtual meeting of Nephrology Forum. So, this is courtesy COVID-19 epidemic. We all have been attending lots of webinars on COVID, and so today I would thank Sonal to have a topic which is, a bit different. I take great pleasure in introducing our guest today, the guest speaker, Dr. Vinita Batra. Now, she is the director and professor and in charge of the renal pathology and electron microscopic division of GB Pant Hospital at Delhi. And she has numerous national and international publications to her credit. She has also done her ISN fellowship on renal pathology and electron microscopy from Brigham and Women's Hospital, Boston. And also she has done fellowship in neuropathology from John Hopkins Institute. So I would not waste much time and invite Dr. Vinita to deliver her talk. So you can start, Dr. Vinita.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta, so for your kind words. Yes. Okay. Hello.
Yes, madam, you are audible. We can hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes, madam, you are audible.
We have lost the connection.
Mr. Milan.
Yeah, I think Dr. Vinita Batra has been discontinued. She has left, I think. She'll again try. Now I think she is trying back. Dr. Vinita, you are there? Hello?
Yeah, so sorry about that because there was some break in the. Hello?
Yeah, madam, you are perfectly audible now. So there was some glitch in between. Now it's
Okay. Okay. So I would like to thank the Nephrology Forum of Ahmedabad for being so kind to invite me for this webinar that we are hosting today. I would also like to especially thank my dear friend Bhavna Mehta, who's my colleague from SGPGI Lucknow, for being so kind to arrange everything for today's meeting. I am really grateful to her. So just as a small introduction, we have a state-of-art electron microscopy lab in our hospital at GV Pant Hospital. We are the super specialty hospital with Maulana Azad Medical College. And the electron microscope that we have is one of the highest models that is available in our country today. And we have a turnover time of 7 working days for our electron microscopy specimens. So coming to the main topic, that is the role of electron microscopy in renal pathology. Electron microscopy is an essential diagnostic tool in renal pathology since the 1960s. But with the onset of immunofluorescence in 1968, it gained a backseat because primarily it is extremely expensive a process and it is laborious to do, and it is also difficult to interpret. You have to have a specific expertise to interpret electron microscopy. However, in the last 25 years, many new diseases have been diagnosed in which electron microscopy plays an essential diagnostic tool. Also, the last 3 BAMF updates in 2017, 15, 17, and 19, they have also extensively used EM in the early diagnosis of antibody-mediated rejection in graft biopsies. And as a result, the use of EM has now been revived and continues to play an important diagnostic role in nephropathology. So I have divided my talk into 2 portions. One is the use of electron microscopy in native kidney biopsies, and the other is the use of electron microscopy in transplant biopsies. So as far as electron microscopy in native kidney biopsies is concerned, we have divided the cases basically into 3 groups. Cases where EM is crucial for diagnosis, cases where EM is not so essential for diagnosis, but plays an important contributory role, and cases where EM has no significant role to play in the diagnosis, but helps to confirm irrevocably the light and the immunofluorescence diagnosis. From this point of view, I would like to bring fresh to your memories that electron microscopy is the ability to look into within each and every cell of the kidney biopsy. So therefore, we are able to diagnose exactly what are the pathologies that is happening at the cellular level. And thus, EM is a gold standard for all nephropathology diagnosis. Now, just in brief, before we go on to the discussion of cases, this is what the normal glomerulus looks like under the electron microscope. So as you can see that this is the Bowman's capsule here. Then you have the urinary space. Then you have the mesangium in this area. And from here, the capillary loop is arising. Now, this capillary loop has this dark gray basement membrane. This is the capillary lumen where you have the endothelial cell with its nucleus. Then you have the cytoplasm of the endothelial cell, which is stretched on the inner surface of the capillary lumina. Here you have the visceral podocyte and the cytoplasmic foot processes which go and align themselves onto the surface of the capillary basement membrane at right angles, so just to form foot processes. So if you go at a higher part, so now this is, you can see that this is the basement membrane. On the outer surface, this is the lamina densa, which is a darker gray area. On the outer surface, you have the lamina externa rara, and on the innermost layer is the lamina rara interna. Now here you have the foot processes of the podocytes, which are arranged perpendicular to the capillary lumina, and on the inner surface you have the endothelial cells, which have holes in between. So between these various holes that are created between these 3 layers, you have the formation of a urinary filter barrier, from which the plasma from the endothelial capillary passes into the urinary space to form the urine. Now coming on to discuss the cases of where electron microscopy plays a crucial diagnostic role. So the first case was a 17-year-old woman who developed sudden onset edema. On physical examination, she was obese and she had pitting edema in the lower extremities. She had a significant proteinuria with inactive sediment in the urine examination. Her 24-hour urinary protein was 6 grams and serum creatine was slightly raised at 2.1 milligram per deciliter. Now, on the basis of these clinical findings, what can be our differential diagnosis? The first and foremost, because of the high proteinuria, you can think of membranous nephropathy. It can also be focal and segmental glomerular sclerosis, secondary to the obesity that this lady is suffering from. It could also be minimal change disease. So we performed the kidney biopsy to find out what was exactly happening. So this is the low power view of the kidney biopsy. Here we have the Bowman's capsule, and then you can see that the cortex is fairly well maintained. You can see the glomeruli over here. The tubules are nicely packed together, and there's no evidence of chronic parenchymal damage. At higher power, if you look at the glomerulus on a PA stain section, you can see that this is fairly well maintained. There is mild increase in mesangial matrix here, which is identified by the dark pink color. But the basement membranes are quite thin here, and there is no thickening of the basement membrane, and there is no evidence of segmental sclerosis. The silver methylamine stain also shows that there is no evidence of basement membrane thickening, so that rules out membranous glomerulonephritis. Then on immunofluorescence, we find that there was no specific immune complex deposition. All that we can see are these protein reabsorption granules in the podocytes, which are basically indicative of the heavy proteinuria. So finally, the electron microscopy was performed, and as you can see over here, these are the mesangial areas. Now here you have the capillary loops, and if you look on the outer surface of the capillary loops, the foot processes are all smoothened out. They are no longer lying perpendicular to the Bowman's capsule, and this phenomenon is called as diffuse effacement of foot processes. So at a higher power view, this is much more clearer now. Again, this is the mesangium, the capillary loop, and here you can see that all the foot processes, they are diffusely effaced. You have some breakout remnants of the foot process also lying. It's a change disease.
Madam, your voice is not audible, I think. Is it?
Next, we go on to the second case where EM Is it okay now?
No, madam, the connection is not good.
Yeah, it's cracking. I think internet bandwidth is low, I think. So you have to.
Okay, let me then connect to my phone in that case. I'll just do that.
Yeah, please.
Madam, 4G se kar le. मैडम अभी
I think she got disconnected and again joined in I think seconds. Just
You can ask her to join with hotspot.
I think she's trying to do that only.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
I joined again. I think ma'am has joined again. Yeah.
Okay, now am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, madam, very much.
Okay, so continuing, sorry with for the break. So the second case was that of a 19-year-old male who presented with multiple episodes of macroscopic hematuria and an ongoing
Madam, can you
continuing
repeat
microscopic.
last comments on previous case? Because nobody has heard the
Okay,
last
so
comments.
I start from here.
Before
So
that, yes.
yeah, so this was the EM photograph of the last case where there was diffuse effacement of food processes, and then there was tubular-villous degeneration in the urinary space. To summarize this last case, there was a young adult female with sudden onset edema. The light microscopy did not show any specific findings. The IF was negative, and on EM there was complete effacement of food processes with no other specific changes. So therefore, the final diagnosis in this case was minimal change disease. You might feel that why is it important to make a diagnosis, to do the kidney biopsy in this case? But the primary fact was that she was a 17-year-old male. She was not a young child, and therefore it was for her long-term prognosis, it was important to do the EM examination of this particular case. Now, the second case where EM plays a crucial diagnostic role is that of a 19-year-old male who presented with microscopic hematuria for last 4 years with intermittent episodes of macroscopic hematuria. She had a serum creatinine of 1.4 milligram that is slightly raised. The proteinuria was very minimal and all serology was negative. The urine sediment showed an inactive sediment with mild hematuria. So on the basis of this clinical history, what is the differential diagnosis? Obviously, the first diagnosis that comes to mind is IgA nephropathy. This can also be because of multiple stones in urinary tract and recurrent UTI. It could be because of thin basement membrane disease or secondary FSGS. Now, as far as stones in the urinary tract is concerned, this can be ruled out very easily by a simple ultrasound. A recurrent urinary tract infection can be ruled out by simple urine sediment examination and a culture and sensitivity. So that leaves with the first diagnosis, that is IgA nephropathy, thin basement membrane disease, and secondary FSGS. Now, to finally confirm the diagnosis, the kidney biopsy was done. So this was the PA stain section of the kidney biopsy. You can see that the glomeruli is a little bit enlarged, but there is no significant increase in mesangial matrix or cellularity. So this kind of rule is against IgA nephropathy. The basement membranes are also well maintained. Then if you look at on IF, there was no deposition of IgA, so therefore IgA nephropathy was excluded. The EM was performed, and in this case, we find that there is again diffuse effacement of food processes over here. The basement membrane looks a little bit not so healthy. And when we examine this on HiPA, we find that at other places, the basement membrane is definitely quite thin. Again, there is diffuse effacement of food processes above. We measured the basement membrane by drawing lines perpendicular to the long axis of the basement membrane, at least at 100 points, and we measure the thickness. So in this way, the basement membrane thickness, it was varied from 173 nanometers to as high as 310 nanometers. So a harmonic mean of these 100 measurements was done, and the mean basement membrane thickness was calculated. So thus, to summarize this case, this was a young male with episodes of microscopic and macroscopic hematuria. There was no proteinuria, no evidence of renal failure. The light microscopy and the IF did not show any positive findings. And on electron microscopy, the patient had thin basement membranes with a harmonic mean thickness of 222 nanometers, which is low for his age. And in addition, there were no immune deposits in the mesangium. So on the basis of these findings, the final diagnosis was thin basement membrane disease. Again, this diagnosis is very important because this patient obviously does not require any kind of immunosuppression, and the kidneys have to be just maintained on long term with nephroprotective drugs so that the disease does not spread on a long-term basis. Then the third case where EM plays a crucial diagnostic role was that of a 64-year-old female who was evaluated by the nephrologist for chronic kidney disease. She was hypertensive. She had a raised serum creatinine of 2.1 milligram per dl. A urine examination showed significant proteinuria with some microscopic hematuria, that is, was active sediment. Complement levels were normal and the cryoglobulins were not detected. So when we did the kidney biopsy in this case, we find that this kidney biopsy showed a fair amount of chronic parenchymal damage. A large number of these glomeruli, they are globally sclerosed, and there's a fair amount of tubular atrophy, interstitial chronic inflammatory cell infiltrate. The viable glomeruli that you can see over here, they appear enlarged and they're showing lobular accentuation. This is the hyper view of the glomerulus on PS stain section, and you can see that there is a fair amount of cellularity. The basement membrane shows focal splitting on silver methamine stain. And when we did the immunofluorescence, we found that the peripheral capillary walls were very strongly positive for IgG. Now this is kind of a linear or a pseudo-linear pattern, and to differentiate it, I have an inset frozen section of a case of membranous glomerulonephritis IgG stain, where you can see that the basal membranes look much thinner and the deposits have a granular consistency. In contrast, this case has what is called as a linear or a pseudo-linear deposition of IgG, which is around 4+. So on the basis of the light and the immunofluorescence diagnosis, what was the differential diagnosis? If we can't be very sure about membranous glomerulonephritis, we need to exclude that out, or MPGN on the basis of the light microscopy. Anti-GBM disease is one condition where you can get linear deposits of IgG on immunofluorescence. So this needs to be excluded in this case. The other differential diagnosis are cryoglobulinemia and fibrillary glomerulonephritis. So we performed the EM in this case, and you can see that the basement membrane is markedly thickened, and there is a deposition of some fluffy kind of material in the entire thickness of the basement membrane. At a higher power, you can see that these deposits at some places have a fibrillary linear kind of a line-like substructure. We again did a further high power, and you can see very clearly that the entire deposits have a fibrillary substructure. And when the diameter of these deposits were measured, it was around 15 to 20 nanometers. So on the basis of these electron microscopy findings and summarizing the history, the patient was a middle-aged woman presenting with CRF. On light microscopy, she had a membranoproliferative pattern of injury. On IF, there was a pseudo-linear deposition of polyclonal IgG. And on EM, we had fluffy deposits in the basement membrane with fibrillary substructures. And so the final diagnosis was fibrillary glomerulonephritis. The fourth case where EM plays a crucial diagnostic role was a 64-year-old male presenting with nephrotic range proteinuria, hematuria, and a serum creatinine of 3 milligram per dl. On light microscopy, the glomerulus is fairly enlarged. It is hypercellular. You can see areas of endocapillary proliferation, and in some places, you can even see infiltration by polymorphs and mononuclear cells. The interstitium also shows a large amount of mononuclear inflammatory cell infiltrate. On IF staining, you can see that there is very strong IgG stain, which is granular, and it is irregular distribution. It is present primarily in the mesangium and focally in the peripheral capillary walls as well. There were no other significant immune complexes in this particular kidney biopsy, but when we did the light chains, we found that all the glomerular deposits were strongly positive for kappa, whereas they were clearly negative for lambda. Here you have a protein reabsorption granule in the Bowman space, which is positive and acts as the internal control. So we know that our stain is working. So on the basis of these findings, a diagnosis of monoclonal immunoglobulin deposition disease was rendered, presenting with a diffuse proliferative pattern of injury. However, we need to further subtype what is the kind of the monoclonal immunoglobulin deposition in this case. So we did the EM, and there were a large number of subendothelial deposits, which at very high power show you a very classical tubular pattern over here, substructures, and you can see the cross-sectional diameter over here, which can be measured, and this came to about 15 to 30 nanometers. So on the basis of the EM findings, the final diagnosis was immunotactoid glomerulopathy. Now, just a description of the other paraprotein diseases, because EM is very important in differentiating between the different paraprotein mediated glomerular diseases. Primarily, you have light chain amyloidosis, fibrillary glomerulonephritis, immunotactile glomerulopathy, and cryoglobulinemia. In amyloidosis, on electron microscopy, the fibrillary deposits are thin, they are 8 to 10 nanometers in diameter. In fibrillary GN, they range about 15 to 30 nanometers, and immunotactoid, they are microtubular deposits which are around 30 to 50 nanometers in diameter. So thus EM plays a very important role in the differential diagnosis of the different paraprotein-mediated glomerular diseases. The fifth case where EM plays a crucial diagnostic role was that of a 5-year-old female presenting to our hospital in December 2018 with multiple episodes of fever, hematuria, and generalized body edema. She was being treated by the private practitioner as a case of recurrent UTI with antibiotics of increasing strength. Her kidney function tests were within normal range, but her urine sediment was active with significant proteinuria. All her serology was within normal range. There was nothing was positive. The viral markers were also positive. So they were all negative, sorry, both the serology as well as the viral markers. So on the basis of this, a clinical diagnosis of atypical post-infectious glomerulonephritis was made and the renal biopsy was performed. So this kidney biopsy, as you can see on low part, shows fair amount of chronic parenchymal damage. This is a sclerosed glomerulus with some degree of tubular atrophy and some interstitial inflammation over here. The viable glomeruli, they are enlarged. Many of them, more than 50%, are showing partial cellular crescents. On high part, the glomerulus shows increase in mesangial matrix and cellularity. Again, you can see the partial cellular crescent. And in focal areas, you can see endocapillary proliferation as well. And the basement membrane, it shows focal splitting, but there's not very significant thickness. So the thickness of the basement membrane appears to be okay. So on the basis of these light microscopy features, a diagnosis of proliferative glomerulonephritis with crescents was made. On immunofluorescence, all the immunoglobulins were negative except for C3, which was deposited all along the peripheral capillary walls in a granular fashion, and in the mesangial areas also, we had some globular deposits as well. The crescents were positive for fibrinogen stain, and kappa and lambda light chains showed equal intensity. So we performed the electron microscopy in this case. This is the semi-thin section of the biopsy, which is stained by toluidine blue. And even at 40x, you can see that the basement membrane shows a darker linear stain, which is quite characteristic. We performed the electron microscopy. This was a cellular glomerulus with fair number of mononucleus cells infiltrating into the lumen. At high part, the basement membranes were markedly thickened, and there were various kinds of deposits replacing the substance of the capillary membrane. They were of different types. At some areas, they were like fluffy and granular in nature. At other places, they were more darker and osmophilic and sausage-shaped. In some places, you can see subendothelial deposits, and in some places, subepithelial humps were also identified. In addition to this, we found another significant finding that this endothelial cell, and in the cytoplasm of the endothelial cell, we found these tubular reticular inclusions. This is also again seen in this another endothelial cell quite clearly over here. So therefore, to summarize this, on the because of the nature of the deposits on electron microscopy, this patient was of C3 glomerulopathy. The ultrastructural features were intermediate between C3 glomerulonephritis and dense deposit disease. This is a feature that we are increasingly seeing as we do electron microscopy in more and more cases of C3 glomerulonephritis. There are also, in addition, tubular reticular inclusions in the endothelial cells, and this is possibly secondary to an alternate complement pathway activation, which is triggered by repeated upper respiratory tract infections that this patient was also giving a history of. Now, this finishes off the cases where EM plays an essential role in the diagnosis, but there are also a fair number of cases where EM plays a very important contributory role in diagnosis. I will go through them very briefly. The first is a case of secondary membranous glomerulonephritis. So, membranous glomerulonephritis is very easy to diagnose both on light microscopy and immunofluorescence. There is no problem. But when you look at on EM, if you want to differentiate between primary and secondary, then EM plays a very important role. For example, this particular case, this is a basement membrane which is showing numerous subepithelial deposits, which confirms the diagnosis of membranous glomerulonephritis. But in addition to these subepithelial deposits, you also have subendothelial deposits in this particular capillary loop, and then you have numerous mesangial deposits. So if you're getting immune complex deposits in all the three compartments, that is the subepithelial, subendothelial, and mesangial, then this is indicative of a case of lupus nephritis. And lo and behold, when we examined the immune deposits at high power, you can see that these deposits had a very classical fingerprint-like structure. So this confirmed the diagnosis of lupus nephritis. So on the basis of the EM findings, we could very confidently give a diagnosis of lupus nephritis, class 4 and class 5. Then another condition where EM plays a very important contributory role in diagnosis is the differentiation between primary and secondary FSGS. Now it is extremely important to differentiate between these two conditions, because one is a FSGS is basically secondary to any kind of necrotizing lesions that have occurred in the glomerulus because of some preceding glomerulonephritis. The treatment of this is completely different from that of primary FSGS. So to illustrate this is the first case. It was an 18-year-old female with sudden onset edema and proteinuria for 2 weeks duration. Her KFT was within normal limits. She had classical features of nephrotic syndrome. Urine sediment showed significant proteinuria, and all her serology was negative. This was what the light microscopy looked like on PS stained. So this part of the glomerulus is clear, definitely unremarkable, and this part is showing clearly features of focal and segmental glomerular sclerosis with collapse of the glomerular tuft and foamy macrophages that you can see, which is a feature that is often seen in acute onset FSGS. So there was no doubt about the diagnosis as far as the light microscopy was concerned. The IF showed non-specific C3 deposits, and when we did the EM, we found that there was diffuse effacement of foot processes on the outer surface of the basement membranes, again confirming the feature that this is a case of primary FSGS, which is a podocytopathy. This is another high-power view of electron microscopy photograph, which shows diffuse effacement of foot processes. So this was a diagnosis. So the final diagnosis in this case was primary or idiopathic focal and segmental glomerular sclerosis. In contrast, there was a second case, which was a 26-year-old male who was admitted for workup of asymptomatic proteinuria, which was discovered incidentally during a routine medical examination. He was mildly hypertensive. On physical examination, he was really obese. His weight was 125 milligrams, but he had no pitting edema. Creatinine was slightly on the higher side, and the 24 urinary protein was in the subnephrotic range. So again, on light microscopy, classical FSGS, this part of the glomerular tuft is fine. This is sclerosed. So you can't differentiate on light microscopy from primary FSGS. The IF also did not show any significant features, but on electron microscopy, if you look, in this part of the glomerular tuft, you can see that there is diffuse effacement of foot processes, but in this part of the glomerular tuft, the foot processes are very nicely maintained. So this kind of focal effacement of foot processes is a classical feature of secondary FSGS, which will help us to differentiate it. So the final diagnosis in this case was focal and segmental glomerular sclerosis, secondary to structural and functional adaptations associated with morbid obesity. Now, another case where EM plays an important contributory role in diagnosis is collapsing glomerulopathy, which is HIV induced. Now, it is not difficult to make a diagnosis of collapsing glomerulopathy on light microscopy, because you can see that the triad is there, that all the tubules are dilated. There is microcystic change packed with casts. The glomerular tufts are collapsed, and there is proliferation of the podocytes on the outer surface of the glomerular tuft. And on EM, there is diffuse effacement of foot processes, which is consistent with the collapsing glomerulonephritis being a part of the podocytopathy subgroup. However, in this particular case, we had another additional finding. When we looked at the endothelial cells, we could identify these tubular reticular inclusions. This is another hyper view of another tubular reticular inclusion, and the presence of these tubular reticular inclusions, as we all know, is very often seen in HIV. And therefore, we could make a diagnosis of collapsing glomerulopathy, which was HIV induced. The HIV tests were performed in this case, and the diagnosis was confirmed. Another case where EM plays an important contributory role in diagnosis is in cryoglobulinemias. Again, this is a condition that we can diagnose very easily on light microscopy and immunofluorescence. Classically, in large glomeruli with which are high, lobular accentuation, there is endocapillary proliferation, and you have these very classical hyaline lumen thrombi within the lumina at various places. On immunofluorescence, these hyaline thrombi, they were strongly positive for IgM. And when we did the light chains, we found that they were restricted to kappa light chains and lambda was negative. So on the basis of this, a diagnosis of IgM kappa cryoglobulinemia was made. On doing the EM, you can see that the deposits have a very classical kind of a crystalline picture, and on high and other places they are more granular in nature. And when you examine these deposits at high power, you can see they have a very classical spherical substructure. So this is very classical of cryoglobulinemia, which will really help to confirm the diagnosis. Some cases the serology does not come positive. So in such cases, the EM becomes a very useful adjunct to confirm the diagnosis. So in this particular case, the hepatitis C marker was positive, and therefore the final diagnosis was hepatitis C related cryoglobulinemia. And this finishes off the use of electron microscopy in the native kidney biopsies. A very few cases, a couple of cases to illustrate the use of electron microscopy in renal transplant biopsies. So as we all know that currently there are basically two conditions in which electron microscopy is useful in transplant biopsies. One is a diagnosis of recurrent or de novo glomerulonephritis. It is important to do EM in all our transplant biopsies so that you can detect the recurrent or the de novo disease at a very early stage where it is still amenable to treatment. The second condition where EM is used in transplant biopsies is in the diagnosis of chronic antibody-mediated rejection. And here again, it is very important to do the EM at a very early stage so that you can pick up the transplant glomerulopathy at an early stage where it is still amenable to therapy. So that is why EM is important. It is important to do EM in all our transplant biopsies. So what are the indications of EM in transplant renal biopsies? If the patient is presenting with proteinuria due to any reason, or there is a clinical suspicion of glomerular de novo or recurrent disease. If on light microscopy we find that the patient has abnormal glomeruli and is showing positive immune complexes. If the patient is clinically at risk for antibody-mediated rejection, and in certain centers, you have timed biopsies where EM is performed. That is at the 3 months biopsy, 6-month biopsy, or 1 year post-transplantation, depending upon what is the protocol in your particular center. There is de novo recurrent glomerular diseases are same as occur in native kidney biopsy, so I won't go into their discussion. As far as the diagnosis of chronic antibody-mediated rejection is concerned, this is important to in cases of the EM is an important tool to diagnose early onset transplant glomerulopathy, and it's important to do so at an early stage because at that point of time the changes are reversible and the graft can be saved. So to illustrate this is the first case. He was a 30-year-old male who was chronic kidney disease following IgA nephropathy. He had received a live related renal transplant from his sister, was on 3-dose immunosuppression. He was apparently all right for 4 years. Subsequently, in October 2019, he developed pulmonary tuberculosis because of which the MMF had to be stopped for 2 months. And subsequently also we had to recontinue it at a suboptimal dose. In April 2020, he developed an increase in serum creatinine for which the kidney biopsy was performed. So by this time, the changes had set in. So as you can see that the glomeruli are enlarged, they are hypercellular with lobular accentuation. There is some degree of glomerulitis also here. On silver methylamine stain, there is diffused duplication of basement membrane. So there is definitely chronic transplant glomerulopathy, CG3. The C4D stain was negative or was positive on immunofluorescence. And on EM, we can see very classical changes. The basement membrane is markedly thickened. There is deposition of some fluffy immune deposits on the inner surface. And in other places, there is marked duplication of the basement membrane to about 4 to 5 layers. And this was seen in a fair number of glomerular capillary loops even in a single glomerulus, and therefore the diagnosis was confirmed. That is, this was life-related renal transplant post 5 years, having chronic antibody-mediated rejection, CG3 and C40 positive. The second case where EM is useful in transplant biopsies was that of an allograft biopsy showing mild increase in serum creatinine. When the biopsy was done, it showed acute tubular injury, but there was no signs of active rejection, and the staining for C4D was negative. So this was the light microscopy. You can see that there is large amount of interstitial inflammation, chronic parenchymal damage. And at high power, you can see that the tubular lining epithelium is markedly damaged at a lot of places. In addition to that, we can see these the nuclei are markedly enlarged in some of the cells, and they appear to have intranuclear inclusions. And when we perform the EM in this case, you can see that this particular nucleus are enlarged with the intranuclear inclusion over here. And when we performed high power view of these inclusions, we found that they were stacked with icosahedral structures, which were about 20 to 50 nanometers in diameter. So this confirmed the diagnosis that this patient had an infestation by polyoma virus. So thus the final diagnosis was polyoma infection of the allograft with acute tubulointerstitial nephritis and signs of tubular injury. So that brings us to the end of the discussion. Just in brief, the latest recommendations that have been made in the last BAMF meeting as far as EM is for taking a sample for EM in transplant biopsies. What they have recommended is that one should take a sample in EM in all cases if possible, and this sample should be fixed in glutaraldehyde and embedded in a resin block. And subsequently, you should at least examine the semi-thin stain sections of these cases. If there is any suspicion of glomerular disease, ultra-thin examination should definitely be done. And you can also do the EM from paraffin blocks. We also do that, which is, however, the EM from the paraffin blocks is good for the electron-dense deposits for the de novo or the recurrent glomerular diseases, and to assess the degree of foot process effacement. But EM from paraffin blocks does not give you a very good images, which are kind of blurred, and therefore it becomes very difficult to diagnose basement membrane thickness or basement membrane duplication at an early stage, or to pick up the peripheral tubular capillary multilayering also at an early stage. So to conclude, the above examples amply illustrate that EM is an important diagnostic tool in renal pathology, both in native and transplant renal biopsies. It plays a crucial diagnostic role in many cases and acts as a helpful adjunctive tool in diagnosis of many cases. At the end of the day, the EM is a gold standard of diagnosis of renal pathology and makes a definite confirmation of whatever we are thinking of in light and IF. And for that point alone, it's extremely important and must be performed in most of our biopsies as much as is possible. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, madam. Was very informative and very useful. Can I request, madam, that the slides which you had sent for the quiz, the fifth one,
Yes.
with EMV and antibody mediated, past antibody mediated, with that is not been shared in this. You have that?
And the CMV, the case which had CMV inclusions in the nucleus.
The last fifth slide. Because most of them could not answer the last one. All the other four.
Yes. So this was also an allograft biopsy 8 months post-transplantation. So in this case, the glomerulus is markedly enlarged. There's hypercellular, and even at this part, you can see that there are some kind of nuclear enlargement and nuclear smudging right over here. So this is basically a case of CMV. I think let me look at the answer finally. Yeah, I'll show you this thing. Okay, so yeah, we do have the IHC. So you can see that this was stain positive for CMV, the nuclei. The IHC for CMV is very good, so we don't really need EM in this case. But in this particular case, the nuclear deposits, they show this kind of a granular staining, and in that you can also see some substructures here. Classical, they are circular, which have like a
Madam,
targetoid appearance.
sorry to interrupt. The slides are, I think, not updated in the screen, right?
Not shared.
So you have to stop sharing and again share the new slides.
Okay,
That then it will be visible.
okay, sorry. So this was the case that was allograft biopsy 8 months post-transplantation. This was a large nucleus, lot of hypercellularity. You can see that the nuclear markedly enlarged over here, and you can see the intranuclear inclusions even on the HNE stain. Here also you can see the intranuclear inclusions. Right? Then we performed the IHC on this. It was positive for CMV. So this was basically a CMV related allograft infestation. And on EM, as you can see, that there was this granular deposits, and between them you can see this very classical targetoid appearance. So this is confirmatory of CMV on EM. But usually for CMV nephritis, you don't need EM. The IHC is good enough, and by that you can make your final diagnosis. So I didn't share this because it was not, it's a very rare phenomena and not very commonly seen. So plus I didn't want to increase the length of the talk also. It is going too long as it is.
Dr. Bhavna, madam.
Yeah, I think Dr. Vinita, it was a really nice, short and sweet lecture. I think everybody enjoyed the lecture. And there are some questions, I think, if we can take one by one. Sonalben, do we have time for the questions to be answered now?
Yes, we have a time, and I think everybody would be like, will take advantage of ma'am. We won't be able to get her.
Yes,
So,
one question from Dr. Kalpesh Gohil. Is there any clue to the diagnosis, etiology of secondary FSGS on EM?
Yes, so basically I try to show that. So in FSGS, there is a you have to look at the entire picture both clinically on light microscopy and on EM. On light, clinically, when you examine that case very carefully, you will find that in case of primary FSGS, the features of nephrotic syndrome are always very sudden in onset. But in secondary FSGS, usually because it is secondary to some primary disease, so therefore the onset of features of nephrotic syndrome is very gradual. So that is one clinical difference. Then usually in primary FSGS, the nephrotic syndrome features are very well characterized. In secondary FSGS, sometimes you may not get all the features of nephrotic syndrome. You can have subnephrotic range proteinuria. On light microscopy, you cannot make any difference. You can't differentiate between the two conditions, and also on immunofluorescence. But on EM, in primary FSGS, you will have diffuse effacement of food processes. But in secondary FSGS, you will have focal effacement of food processes. So that will help to distinguish between primary and secondary FSGS.
Yeah,
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Kalpe.
See, the question is, I think my question is not interpreted in a correct manner. My question was, can you have any clue to diagnose the etiology of secondary membranous, not the differentiation between primary and secondary membranous, I mean, FSGS, sorry. Can you get any clue? Because a lot of times we biopsy and we find secondary FSGS, but we don't have any clue because the clinical presentation is classical of secondary FSGS, where there is a subnephrotic range proteinuria. Albumin is fairly preserved. When you biopsy, you find FSGS. So this is classical of secondary FSGS. But when you biopsy, you don't know the exact etiology. They are not obese. They are HIV is negative. They don't have reflux. They don't have any other chronic infection. So sometimes we are in no man's land. We don't know the exact cause of secondary FSGS. So can EM help in identifying the etiology of secondary FSGS in any way?
Yes, so for example, suppose the secondary FSGS is because of a healed condition of, say, IgA nephropathy. I mean, the patient had a episode of acute necrotizing and crescentic gene because of IgA nephropathy, and this subsequently healed. So on EM, you might get those mesangial electron-dense deposits on EM. And you might also get to some extent on immunofluorescence as well, but some mediated, then you will get no clue at all because there are no deposits. You will only get the features of secondary segmental sclerosis. One clue in the light microscopy is that in secondary FSGS, the remaining glomeruli, they show features of compensatory hypertrophy. So that it's a very subtle clue, but it needs to be looked at. So in the case of secondary FSGS, you will have compensatory hypertrophy of glomeruli. The interstitium will not be so clean. In primary FSGS, the interstitium is very nicely clean. There is no chronic inflammatory infiltrate. There will be some degree of chronic parenchymal damage, but not so significant. But in secondary FSGS, you will have a lot of chronic parenchymal damage. So that these are subtle clues which are there in light microscopy. And on EM, if there is because of an immune complex mediated disease, then you might get to see the immune deposits on electron microscopy. And the other clue I told you was that in secondary FSGS, you will have only focal effacement of foot processes, but in primary FSGS, you will have diffuse effacement. So that is also one clue. Does that answer your question?
Go to next question.
Kalpesh,
Now you can go to the next question.
yeah, so the next question is from Dr. Vivek Putte. In transplant, EM finding in transplant recipient with COVID. I don't think.
So you want me to tell you about how the COVID virus will look like on EM?
Vivek bhai, are you there?
Graph.
Do you have any special electron microscopy findings of COVID? Madam, if you can.
No, I have not frankly seen any case because no case was biopsied. I mean, the clinical counterpart, we were interested in doing that, but the clinical counterparts over here, they said that either the patient is too sick or suddenly starts recovering and there is the kidney biopsy is not required. I have frankly no idea in what we will get on the kidney biopsy on COVID at present. I have not seen any case.
In some of the autopsies, then we may sometimes get afterwards.
Yes, yes.
It's published.
Okay, then next question is from Dr. Ravi Badania. Disadvantages of formalin embedded core sent for EM. Do you find the difference between the EM, what you do in the glutaraldehyde fixed tissue and formalin fixed tissue?
Oh yes, there is a lot of difference between the EM photographs of what you get from the paraffin blocks as well as the tissue that is fixed in glutaraldehyde. In fact, we don't even use glutaraldehyde, we use buffered glutaraldehyde, that is Karnofsky's fluid, because that fidelity of pictures from the formalin block are not good. I mean, if you really need it, then obviously you can kind of make do with it and get some diagnosis, but it is much better to fix the tissue in the EM fluid when you're doing the biopsy. Even if you don't want to do it at that point of time, initially you can just keep it and then do the EM later on if you feel it is required, but that will give you much better fixation and much better pictures and a more clearer diagnosis. But we are doing EM from paraffin, that is not the issue.
Actually, I have one observation. One of the patient who had to do electron microscopy initially, but then finally they were not ready to do it at that time. So the tissue was already taken, kept it in the fixative, and they took it home. They kept it in the refrigerator for some time and they put it in the deep fridge for 6 months. After 6 months, they came and they said they want to do the electron microscopy. So it was like we had never done it, but we tried and the results were good. So the tissue can be kept for a longer time in the refrigerator or the deep fridge.
Yes, yes, you can do that, definitely. No issue at all. You can keep it and then you can run the electron microscopy if you feel
Where we can decide.
it is always much better to do the to take a sample for EM when you're doing the biopsy, because obviously you can't repeat the procedure again. As far as my experience is concerned, uh, I mean, this was something that we saw when I was doing my fellowship in Brigham and Women's Hospital. So at that point of time, very often they would not even do the entire immunofluorescence panel in the transplant biopsies because they felt that it was not required. They just did the C4D, most of the people. But this was a principle of my mentor in Brigham. We used to do IF and EM on all the transplant biopsies. And we found that the incidence of subclinical de novo or recurrent disease in these patients was very high. Factor, sometimes even the when it's very the deposits are very few in number, the IF also does not pick it up, but they're picked up in EM. So if you're able to pick up the recurrent disease or the de novo immune complex mediated disease at an early stage, you will be able to treat. I've learned that by my mentor that it is preferable to do EM in all the transplant biopsies. And nowadays, with the latest recommendations by BAM, they are also recommending to do EM in all transplant biopsies.
Madam, even after immediate transplant?
Always go to take the specimen, you may or may not process it. Transplant, it is not really required. No, I think after 3 months or so, that is the first time that you will require to do the EM. That is the recommendation, that the first biopsy 3 months after the transplant, if you take it, then you do the EM. Because transplant glomerulopathy can set in as early as 3 months.
Dr. Vinita, if the nephrologist does not have glutaraldehyde when they are doing the biopsy, although they arrange well in advance, but sometimes if they take and they don't have, can they collect in any other media?
So then in that case, it is better to fix it in formalin and transfer it to glutaraldehyde as soon as you can. At least that way the fixation to some extent is not all that bad.
But Michel media will not be better than formalin?
No. Michel's media does not contain any fixative, and the results of EM on Michel's media are not good at all.
Okay, now one more question from Dr. Ravi. Any clues in light microscopy in IF which may point towards need for EM?
Okay, so for example, with the case of fibrillary glomerulonephritis, on IF you can see a pseudo-linear pattern. It is not a granular pattern, so that is an indicator. Then when you are looking at light chain restriction on IF, suppose you have only kappa and not lambda, then in that case also you should do the EM to confirm what is the nature of the paraprotein disease, whether it is amyloid or it is fibrillary gene or it is immunotactoid. Then I did not show one case. I removed it from this because the talk was going too big. Sometimes you can see a very foamy change in the cytoplasm of the endothelial cells, and that can indicate either a hereditary nephritis or it can indicate Fabry's disease. So in that case, if you see any foamy change in the cytoplasm of the visceral epithelial cells, then you must do the EM in that case. But on the whole, we find that in cases of post-infectious GN which are not responding to therapy, you must do the EM, because we are picking up a lot of cases of C3 glomerulonephritis. I mean, now that we are regularly doing EM in our cases, we have a very high incidence of C3 GN. And we feel that probably this high incidence is because in our country we have a lot of subclinical infections going on, and these infections constantly they stimulate the altered complement pathway, reducing C3GN. So in the last 2 years, I've collected a lot of cases of C3GN because of this reason. So in this condition also, you should do the EM. So there's a whole variety of conditions where the EM should be done. There's no harm in having an additional mode of diagnosis to, it's at the end of the day, it is still the gold standard. So you always get something additional on EM, you don't lose ever.
There is one more question. Can we make protocol to collect all samples in glutaraldehyde instead of formalin? Dr. Divyesh has asked this question.
No, that does not work at. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what we have found is that if we do the light microscopy on samples which are fixed in glutaraldehyde, glutaraldehyde is a very it's a very corrosive fixative, and it changes the pH of the tissue. So when you perform the special stains, especially Mason's trichrome or PS, then they do not come out so well. So light microscopy is a very basic part of the results. So in that case, when if the PS is going wrong or the MT is going wrong, then that is not, it's quite problematic. So I do not find that a good idea to put the tissues in glutaraldehyde. I mean, that does not help too much, because then you're losing out on the quality of the light microscopy.
Dr. Umapati has asked one question. When protease digestion is needed in C3 glomerulonephritis to rule out paraproteinemia?
So basically, I think he's talking of masked antibodies. C3 glomerulonephritis and paraproteinemias is not related. I don't quite get the question. I mean, can you please clarify?
You can unmute and ask.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes only C3 will be positive and then which will be misdiagnosed. And after the electron, they saw the immune.
Yes. So basically, you're talking about masked immunoglobulins. Yes, in that case, yes. If you are clinically suspecting, for example, you have on light microscopy something like an FPGA
all others will be digestion. So what are the yes. When every patient we should do a protein, or only in a clue after the EM, or only after the thing we can be required to do, or an elderly patient, everybody should do a protein digestion, protease digestion.
No, I don't think you don't need to do in every case. Usually the light microscopy gives you a clue, because in these cases you have a lot of proliferation in the light microscopy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, so you get a lot. The light microscopy will show you features of proliferative glomerulonephritis or MPGN-like picture. I mean, the paraproteins classically present as a nodular glomerulonephritis with deposits in the mesenchyme. And then if you're not getting anything on IF, then yes, you should go for protease digestion. But otherwise, if the light microscopy is not showing you any significant changes, there is no need to go in for protease digestion in every case.
Actually, we have talked about the use and the advantage of doing EM. What are the limitations of doing EM?
So the basic problem is, first of all, it is time taking.
Actually, the patient is paying lots of money for electron microscopy. The common what we get from the patient is that we paid so much and we did not get the result. At times it happens, right? In electron microscopy, we may not have adequate tissue or if we have adequate tissue, maybe it is not representative. So you may not be able to come to the diagnosis. So can you say something about it?
So, as far as tissue adequacy is concerned, if we, when we are doing the biopsy, we take a look at the biopsy under the stereoscopic microscope or the hand lens. So we make sure that we are taking a fair amount of cortical tissue for the EM, then that at least the adequacy problem will be solved. That is one part of the procedure that we can ensure that adequacy of specimen is there. Then the other thing is that in every case, EM is not always useful. So the cost is an issue, and I perfectly understand the reservations in the mind of the patient as well as the treating physician. But I have found that because we are basically a government institution, and most of our cases we don't charge anything, so we don't have that limitation, and we find that doing the EM is really proving to be useful, because in many cases you get completely, it throws up a completely new dimension to the diagnosis, which is helpful in the treatment. So yes, it is expensive and we need to bring down the cost. There is no reason for the EM procedure to be so expensive. So that could be one way of offsetting the problem. But we should, after taking a look at the light microscopy and immunofluorescence, if we feel that EM is essential, we can go forwards. Otherwise, we can avoid it.
Okay, there is one nephropathologist who wants to ask, Dr. Roma, are you doing serum Plat2 or IHC for every membranous nephropathy?
The question is, yes, I am doing PLA2R levels in the serum. I am also doing it in the by IHC on the kidney biopsy, but the results by IHC are not very reliable. So I'm finding, in fact, that the serum PLA2R levels correspond much better to the clinical activity as compared to the PLA2R levels on IHC. So yes, we are doing both the methods at present to try and decipher as to how we can, which of the two is more sensitive and specific. So as a research protocol, we are doing at present, we are doing both methods.
But Pauna, there is one question from Dr. Subho.
Yeah, but I am not able to understand this question. Okay. Dr. Subho, can you ask yourself, unmute and ask yourself?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. So I just wanted to know what exactly is the process once you receive the biopsy. So how exactly is the processing done before the tissue is subjected to the final EM?
I also don't understand.
Why do we need the 7 days? What is the process?
For EM, how do you go about it? Why it takes such a long time?
Okay, so actually it doesn't really take so long a time. We have decreased the processing time to, actually the processing protocol is 24 hours only. But because of Indian conditions where we are not able to control the environmental conditions inside the lab so well as the people abroad can do so. So we are forced to do processing for a period of about 48 hours. So that's a little longer than that. But subsequently, the cutting and the staining, that is also very specific and laborious and time-taking. So another day for cutting and staining, the semi-thins and the ultra-thins. And so therefore, actually on the 4th day, we are able to do the EM. So on the day we receive the biopsy, it takes 48 hours to do the processing. The 3rd day is for the cutting and the staining. And on the 4th day, we are able to view the EM and do the reporting. So that is like 4 working days. If everything goes well, we are able to do the reporting.
Okay. Any more questions?
Processing, we are able to do the scoping on the 3rd day. Okay. So we are like 24 hours late.
Dr. Ravi wants to know, is EM commonly used in any other organ biopsy? Do you do nerve biopsy, muscle biopsy?
Yes, we are doing nerve biopsies where we are regularly doing, we are regularly receiving nerve biopsies. Nerve biopsies, we are primarily processing up to the semi-thin levels because we want to basically look at the myelination status, and they're able to do that on semi-thins. We are also doing some skin biopsies to look for some neurological disorders. And we are also doing EM now on cytology samples as well to see if we can make some diagnosis on FNAC samples. We also actually have a research program running where we are working on with somebody for production of the COVID vaccine. So they are actually producing the proteins of the COVID virus, the proteins present in the outer coating. They're synthetically producing them, and they come and view that under the EM microscope to see whether the protein produced is of the required quality or not. So that is also, I mean, research point of view also we are using the EM for that.
COVID vaccine.
I think we are not having any further questions. Anybody? If then we can close the session now. If any other questions from anybody? So it was a really wonderful session, madam, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I would like to announce the prizes for the quiz. The first prize goes to Dr. Aniket from Mujibhai Patel Urology Nadia. The second prize goes to Dr. Ravi Kumar Badania from Gujarat Kidney Foundation. And third prize goes to Dr. Avinash Rao, again from Nadia. Congratulations to all three.
Thank you so much.
And I will share all the slides, this quiz questions and answers to the group. If somebody has any queries, they can solve, because it has detailed description of all the answer given by madam. I would like to thank everyone for participating and giving an active participation in the symposium. Also, I would like to thank JB Chemicals for organizing everything. Do you have to say anything from the Himanshu and?
Yeah, madam, thank you so much for giving this opportunity. In fact, I would like to thank Ahmedabad Nephrology Forum for organizing such a wonderful program. We had a very enthusiastic participation all across Gujarat, and at point of time there were 50 doctors, nephrologists from Gujarat at a single platform. So that itself speaks the volume of the program you have organized and arranged. I would like to thank personally to you for taking interest in every minor details and making this program a very successful program, and looking forward for future opportunities as well. Thank you once again. Thank you, everyone.
We like to present a moment to. I would request you to please show the motto for the madam and for the chairperson.
Yes, yes. Our both the sir at Dr. Bhavna madam and Asim at house only. Please, ma'am.
It's not seen. Can you please share?
Yeah, I'll just.
Yes. 1 minute.
Can you also show the prizes or mementos which you have made for the winners?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, kal printing mein aayega.
Okay. We can just courier them to that. Thank you, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll leave.
Yeah, I'm ending the session, ma'am, with your permission. Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
software